Okay. Well, thank you for joining. What I'll do is I'll run through a couple of slides, talk about this case study, and then show you some of the dynamics that were created. And then we'll have a little chat about the tools themselves and how they fit into the scope of what's possible in remote meetings, and look at some of the results and feedback and so on. So just any questions before we start? Is there anything particular you'd like to look at? What particularly enticed you to join this webinar? What are you hoping to learn? Any questions? We can really focus this now because there's only 4 of us on the call. So happy to direct what I say towards some of your questions, or what do you have in mind as to what you'd like to learn?
How about persuading our clients to embrace this technology more enthusiastically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great opportunity for that. Yes.
Yes, and I think it's how to be different than all your other, all the other companies who are also going to do webinars online and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. Robert, anything to add?
Yeah, basically, for me, it's actually it's how to replicate the face-to-face in a virtual experience. That seems to be the kind of the crucial thing for our kind of participants at the minute. We just had a good experience with our first virtual meeting that we switched over. It was the AAT Alzheimer's Congress that was due to take place in Vienna in end of March, beginning of April. So we managed in a very short space of time to flip that over to a virtual. And while we generally, managed to kind of engage with the speakers and got them to, pre-record their talks and stuff, what we missed and what our participants missed, judging from the comments, was the networking, and that for them, is still a crucial part of the conference experience. And although there's many tools I see available, it's really how to kind of replicate that important missing face-to-face element in a virtual experience.
Yes, yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Certainly in a large convention or conference, you have people who are looking at the information that's coming to them, and they're absorbing that, and that's perhaps the reason that they've booked and gone to the conference. But actually, it's those casual conversations. It's who they meet. It's networking with people around the same topics and so on that really enhances the experience. And the takeaways from that is their personal experience of how they've networked.
I think they call it the corridor talks, don't they? That's what they miss.
Yeah, and the coffee breaks and the evenings and so on. And those are hugely important. And of course, those are things that we can't replicate, per se. But I think you can build in the opportunity for people to meet in small groups, work in small groups, and therefore build up that sort of relationship stuff that previously you could only do in a face-to-face environment. Okay.
Steve, can I just come in on that one? Because that sort of contact, I think, is kind of interesting. There's both a formal and an informal, both a directed and a random way of doing that. And that's through the breakout rooms.
Yeah.
I ran a session recently for 66 people, and within 5 minutes I had set up 22 breakout rooms, and everyone was facing 2 strangers because this was a group who largely didn't know one another at all. And it was just an opportunity for people to say, hello, I'm Blogs, and what are you, and who are you interested in, and so on. And many of them commented afterwards that it was far superior in a virtual environment, because if you just rock into the conference theater or the big lecture hall, you might or might not talk to the people beside you, but by being directed into a breakout room, it broke the ice for them, which was kind of interesting.
So the experience we're having is that is the crucial and must be built in. And I think it's great that you found that kind of enhances that ability. What is also possible is to just build more time into your program. And it often feels, when you're designing a program and you've got eminent speakers and you've got people with really interesting content to share, when the program says, 45 minutes at the beginning just to allow participants to introduce themselves, my pet hate is that kind of step round, and it's even worse virtually, where you go to each individual and they say who they are and who they work for and what their interest is and so on. It's a dreadfully painful process to watch as facilitator, and I think also to participate in, because you're always worried about what you're going to say and when you're going to get a chance to speak, rather than thinking about what other people are saying. Oh, that's interesting, I must connect with Bob or Robert afterwards. So building in the small groups, and I think you're right, between sort of 3 and 4 is about right, depending on the number of people. You're forced into that room, and I think 2 or 3 rounds of that, perhaps scattered through the event, and we'll talk about the timings of the event when we come into that, because they don't need to be so long. If it's a day's conference, you don't need to replicate that online as a day. You can do different things and compress the time frame. But yes, people go away thinking, oh, well, I've actually met 2 or 3 other people, or 5 or 6 other people who can do 2 or 3 rounds. And those are the things that, like in face-to-face, really enhance that sense.
And Steve, just on that, have you a rule of thumb for constituting the same people in the breakout rooms each time, or when do you change them?
I tend to go, if you're talking about the numbers you were talking about, 60 odd, then it's got to be random. Right. Simply because of the logistics of setting up and directing people into the rooms just takes time, and it's sort of almost irrelevant because you either go into a deep detail about who's from where and how you place them in groups, which is going to take hours, or you just put them in random groups, and then you do that 2 or 3 times during the time, so they can reflect and think and discuss what's been going on in terms of content, as well as just get to know people a little bit more.
So the default then in Zoom, for example, is that they do a random reallocation rather than retain, because there is a button that says recreate, isn't there?
There is.
Is that only the number of rooms and doesn't necessarily bring the same people to the same rooms?
Yeah, I think so. And I think with certainly 60, I think the probability of you ending up in the same room is low. But as facilitator, you can also move people to different rooms once they're on the list. So you've got that level of control as well, and checking into 1 or 2 of the groups to see that they're kind of in process is also an important element of that. Otherwise, the facilitator just sitting there waiting for the 10 minutes or whatever for people to come back.
Yeah.
Good. Well, let me just run through literally 2 or 3 slides, and in a larger environment, you'll see here the opportunity for anybody to ask a question or make a comment or reference an experience is possible on the right-hand side of these slides. So I'd encourage you to have a little play with that. But again, as we're such a small number, just if you have any questions or you want to clarify something, just speak out. So my proposition is that, and it's based on my experience both before COVID-19 and during COVID-19, that a well-planned virtual event can be better than a face-to-face event. And in the context that I'm talking about the totality of what it takes to organize a face-to-face event from the sponsor and the organizer's perspective, but also from the participants. They have to take time out of their diary. They perhaps have to travel to a new city or country. They have to commit time and expense with a knock-on effect of what they were doing and so on. So there's a great cost to a face-to-face conference or workshop. So we've all spent many decades trying to add value to that experience, and we've talked about some of those from the networking perspective and so on. But in the virtual world, the case study I'm talking about is a government stakeholder engagement workshop where they just need input and feedback from a large group, a large range of stakeholders, so that they are able to redraft their policy that then takes into account the stakeholders' perspective. So what I want to talk about today is what we've learned about the difference between face-to-face and virtual meetings. I'm looking at my other screen here, by the way. How the diligent use of technologies can actually enhance the participant experience and also the organizer and speaker's experience. The results are consistently saying that the experience from participants particularly is better than their previous face-to-face experience, which is an interesting expectation to explore a bit more. And just very briefly about me, I've been doing this for about 25 years. What this is working with groups, working with organizations, running events, running conferences, designing and planning all sorts of different interventions. And in the last 5 or 6 years have specialized particularly in virtual working. So trying to take what we know works really well in a face-to-face environment and replicate that, and take some of the flaws that we know exist in the face-to-face environment, which tend to be amplified in the virtual world, and just dampen those down a bit and really focus on interactive participation by the participants and a really good connection in terms of the content and how people express their ideas, capture their thinking, and give feedback to the presenters on the topics they're talking about. So making it much more interactive in a virtual environment. And you're welcome to connect with me afterwards. So just a little bit more detail about the environment. This was a planned workshop for the UK government's smart energy team, and they were looking to engage 80 participants, roughly 80 participant stakeholders. And the stakeholders come from a wide range of the energy industry. So one of the important aspects is that when you put all those people in a room, they are very well aware that they're perhaps in a room that is also containing competitors, people with different perspectives, lobby groups, energy groups, people who have a particular perspective on their approach or their part in this whole energy supply chain. So they are less or they're more reluctant to say what they really think in those environments. But it's an incredibly crucial time that doesn't happen very often in the formulation of policy in a government for the stakeholders to actually say what they think. So we're offering an opportunity in a face-to-face environment through technology, which we've now lifted into the virtual space. And MeetingSphere is one of the tools we use. We use all sorts of other tools as well, and I'll show you some of those technologies later. I also want to just finish off today by talking a little bit about the technology market and what's possible, and perhaps have a chat with you about some of the tools that you may have used and what your experience of those tools are. So what the problem was, the energy policy team were on a critical path. They were responsible for organizing the COP26 conference, which has since been delayed in Glasgow. And it was crucial that the new energy policy that was basically carbon neutrality by 2050 in the UK, it maintained its momentum through this period. And this was week 3 of lockdown. So they decided to move the arranged workshop, which was 1 day in London, where all these 80 people come to an online event. And we compressed the time frame to 2.5 hours, which was a really interesting decision because we didn't know how long we needed. But we knew that we couldn't capture people and keep their attention for the whole day. So what was the optimum time to have these people engage? Welcome to making the comments, please, on the right-hand side as we go through this. So you can see there the objectives or the problem. The assumption about how people could interact and what level of quality they got from the smart energy team was difficult to assess because they really didn't know what they were walking into. And one of the aspects was that the timing I've already talked about. The other aspect was combining the technologies. So we used Zoom, and we also used the MeetingSphere tool to allow people to participate. Already, you're asking people to manage 2 applications on the screen, which I'm learning is either second nature to people. That's the way they work with their technology. They're always switching between apps. Or people have a real struggle having 2 applications running. So we need to think about how we do that and how we integrate it and how we launch MeetingSphere and so on from chat and Zoom and those sort of things. Interesting question. Thank you about the security concerns. The technology we're using, I know Zoom's had its problems and has done some radical updating on its security technology in the last couple of weeks in a overwhelming amount of feedback about the lack of security. That's why it's been so successful, basically, because it's pervasive and everybody can use it. MeetingSphere is deeply secure, and it's all encrypted. It's in the cloud, and it's available with no download on any machine. So we get very, very few people, perhaps the odd government employee who's using an 11-year-old machine can't get in because the browsers haven't been updated. But apart from that, it is deeply secure. And it's registered and managed by government and defense organizations and all sorts of things all over the world. So we can go into that in more detail. There's more detail on the MeetingSphere website around security. So what we had was a series of 4 presentations in 20-minute slots. They were 8 to 10 minutes of input through slides with questions running in the right-hand side, as we're doing here. We then went into the topics the presenter introduced, which were aspects of the smart energy group, the smart energy policy, and we went into more detail with some prompts, and I'll show you that in a minute. We then had a reflection and a plenary based on the feedback that the energy team was seeing live, so they were able to respond to certain questions live and also commit to writing up questions of more detail with references and so on later in the process. But the net effect for the smart energy team was that they were able to collect a vast amount of data on very specific aspects of the policy that even in a face-to-face environment, and especially without the use of this type of technology, would have been scribbled on notes in people's heads, talked about at table level, and not really captured unless there were government note takers at each table diligently recording and writing down everything that had been said. And then, of course, you've got this huge problem of what to do with all that mass of data, and how to record it, how to put it in one place, how to sort it, how to make sure that you're listening to the key messages and you're not being kind of enticed into discussions with lobby groups who have a very specific angle on energy, for example, that they're pushing towards the government. And I'll show you some of the feedback now. So I know this is a crowded slide, but it's a direct copy paste from some of the evaluation. And I think 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 comments on the feedback said that this was better than face-to-face. So hence my proposition, which is the title of this webinar. Any other comments, questions? Anything you want me to clarify? No? Okay, so let's have a quick look at what it actually looks like in the tools. So I talked about the 4 key topics that were presented to the participants. And I am assuming you're all seeing this in MeetingSphere. I can share my screen if you want as well, but I'm delighted that you're able to see this in the technology. And what we have here is the 4 key topics, and then a coverall, which is the pink one on the right-hand side, which is what is missing from our vision. So giving people a chance to reflect on the bigger issues and what might be missing as a key topic in the emerging policy. And if you enter any of these bubbles, you can see that there are effectively 2 pages of content. So in the bottom right-hand corner, for example, of the green bubble, you can see a 1 and a 2. And if you click on the 1, in fact, let me focus you here, because I've got the ability to pull everybody into the section of the tool that I'm looking at. And you can see here that, first of all, so imagine this is after an 8 or 9 minute presentation. And then specifically, the participants were asked, what actions do you think industry need to take? Ofgem is the regulator. What actions do they need to take? And when you scroll down, you'll see another prompt, which is about what actions do you think need to be taken by government? Underneath that, you can see the responses from the participants. And you'll notice that at its base level, MeetingSphere is anonymous, but actually what we asked people to do is register as they went into this tool from their particular sector. So we've got the additional perspective here of the comments are coming from a particular sector within this participant group. And what's really interesting when you scroll down is that you see, for example, there's a comment number 19, Again, I'll focus you on that, which is about guidance on network and system operators considering their carbon impact. And you'll see that that was put in by a network system operator. And then we've got high levels of agreement from an aggregator, a supplier, and another aggregator, a trade association, a supplier, and somebody who wasn't prepared to declare who they were. So you're getting that sense of, or the government team are getting the sense of what really lands with people and where the agreement is, to the degree where we don't want a definitive consensus around this, because the government still have to retain ownership of the policy and they have to manage the political and economic lines very closely. So we don't want people to think that they are definitively altering the shape of the policy, but necessarily they need to feel included and listened to and participating in the emergence of that technology. The emergence of that policy. What you'll also notice from this is that one critical element in this is the ability to leave the tools running for actually, in this case, a week after. So people could think about what they'd heard, reflect on it, and then revisit the technology through the link and go back in and add further comment. Once we'd done the face-to-face the virtual face-to-face in Zoom 2.5 hours, I then switched on the ability for the tool to register the date and time that comments were added. So you can see where they've got a supplementary April 3rd, 2020, 8:30 a.m. We know that that comment was put in after the live workshop. Again, enhancing that sense of being really able and open to your participants, in this case, stakeholders, for their contribution.
Steve, how long did it take to capture all these comments?
This was something like 10 minutes. So about the same time, we did these 20-minute sections. So 8 to 10 minutes of presentation, switched into the tool, and then an 8 to 10-minute discussion, and then 2 or 3 minutes just reflecting back from the presenter what they had heard on their key topic in the policy. So 22, 23 minutes, and that section was done, and we moved on to the next topic, which in this case was market facilitation, wholesale market, and so on.
And these were all individual comments. People weren't working in teams of 2, 3, or 4 or anything.
No, they were all separate. They're all in their own place of work or their own lockdown situation.
Yeah.
So there was interaction through the chat between participants, but otherwise they were as in an audience in a face-to-face where they were just sitting there. Alinda, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're just running through the technology that we use to support this government stakeholder engagement workshop, and I'm showing some of the content in MeetingSphere. If you wouldn't mind just signing into MeetingSphere as well, in the chat on the Zoom webinar is a tiny URL that you can join, and you can see the MeetingSphere tools. Let us know when you're catching up, and say hello if you want to. Okay. So basically, the tools allowed this to be entirely documented, so that we had everybody's input. We allowed them to continue for another week, and during that time, we prepared the team for making sense of this data by giving them an additional tool in MeetingSphere, which had a copy of the data. And here is how it looks. So the previous tool was called the discussion tool, which has the topics that you then deep dive into. This tool is the brainstorm tool that we also used for the introductions some time ago. And what we're seeing here is all the content. So if you click through any of these prompts, as we called them, example, what actions do we think the government need to take? Here, you can see the content that is copied from the previous tool. And also on the right-hand side, you see the comments that were made against the ideas. So the team can now begin to sort this data, and they really have free range here. I've given them all the editing rights in the tool as participants, so they can add things like the topics on the right-hand side. And what they're going to do is extract, this is copy of the data, so they've been working on this for weeks, is extract what they really need to hear in terms of lessons that will impact on the development of their policy. What they've heard from the participants that they think is not to be included in the policy because it's too biased towards one part of this long energy supply chain. And other things that they need to respond to, perhaps questions or concerns that certain stakeholders have that they need to respond to individually to those stakeholders or that group of stakeholders. So I'll just pause there for any comments. And we've got 10 minutes left. So any questions or anything you'd like to see again? I'm just going to show you very quickly that in another aspect of this technology, and this is what I think I'm showing you takes it a little bit further from a sort of a Q&A technology that you may have used in a conference, or capturing evaluation or running the odd poll or managing questions through chat. This tool gives us the flexibility to have a really whole process, divergent, convergent process and a step through, so you can converge people down into some quite detailed decisions, which of course is important for any size of group. High quality decision making is one of the aspects of this tool and why it's been designed like this. So you can see in this tool that we had a brainstorm around the biggest threats with an organization recently, and I added this voting application here, which allows us to look at 2 criteria. It could be more. And I asked them to rate on uncertainty and biggest impact. And you see the threats on the left-hand side: AI, megacities, global recession, and so on. So once participants had added their scores, and that takes as much time as the sort of depth of decision that you need to make, how critical it is to the group. So it might be you know, a fairly quick vote. It might be a very detailed vote that goes on over days because people need to refer to data and so on. And what we've also got then instantly, which is brilliant as a facilitator, is now the ability to see the results. And what we're doing here is instantly being able to see where people have agreed, what the priorities are, and the standard deviations, which gives us the degree of consensus. We can go into more detail in either one of those criteria and see actually the range and where people had voted on the scale. And it also gives us some really nice graphics that we can then look to and stimulate a different discussion. So here's a very simple bubble chart that shows the 2 criteria and where the threats, those 9 threats, fit in terms of what people's impression of uncertainty and impact will be. So again, as a facilitator, this tool gives me the ability to lead a group through a step-by-step process that leads to a high-quality endpoint. And because people have actively participated in the process, they automatically feel much more committed and bought into the outcomes because it's their work, it's not being done to them. And as we know from our experience in, say, change or mergers or big shifts in organizations' strategy, getting people to buy in and follow you is a really important aspect, which ultimately dictates the success or failure of that particular proposition. So just want to go back to the slides, pause for any questions. If you have any reflections, please put them into this tool on the right-hand side. Alinda, I'm assuming that you've been able to join us in MeetingSphere. I can see 5 people in there. I don't know, and I can see that you know, you signed in with your email, so thank you very much. So our learning from this experience in this stakeholder engagement workshop, I was working with a new team who haven't seen this technology before. It had been around their department, but there was no direct impact. We had a rehearsal the day before, which was the only time we could schedule it. They did a brilliant job in really understanding what the new roles were and being very specific about those roles. You can see those there: presenter, content expert, facilitator, technographer, a person who's managing the technology, perhaps the Zoom and also MeetingSphere, and working absolutely in, you know, as a double act with the facilitator, as I'm doing myself today, but switching into the right activities and so on. Always have somebody monitoring the team chat, which is a back channel. In this case, we used WhatsApp, just so that the organizer team and the facilitator team were connected, and there were messages going on all the way through about timing and who's next, and can you talk to the presenter, and are the slides ready, and so on. So the normal sort of thing that goes on in a large event, perhaps through the cans with the production team and the lighting team and the facilitator team. And we also need to manage and make sure we're responding to wherever participants are putting in their chat, either through the technology in MeetingSphere or through the chat in, say, Zoom in this case. Key learning, again, don't forget that you can run this asynchronously over time, before and after the event. So we're not isolating the process, in this case, getting as much feedback to the energy team in the UK government as possible in a short window that only was the 2.5 hours. This was extended over the next week, and something like a third of the content came in after that. Good design, good planning, as in every event, is the utter crucial effect. And if you don't get that right and you don't contract that correctly, then of course, as we know, the event is not going to go as well as you hoped it would. So this is applying your absolute skills that you have at the moment as event designers and just adjusting it in this world. And the very relevant question that's come up: how long does it take to be proficient as a facilitator? As a facilitator using this sort of technology, the shift is rather smaller than you might imagine, because you're constructing and designing the event in the same way. You're framing the questions in the same way. It's just that in a face-to-face environment, you might get 1, 2, 3, or 4 people responding to that question. Through the technology, you get everybody to respond to that question. And then one of the adjustments as facilitators is to be able to look at the input coming in from participants and give a top-level view about what you see as the key themes or the major questions in that. And then perhaps pose those questions verbally. So there's many techniques, but most of them are intrinsic to anybody who has an experience as facilitator. Learning the technology takes however long it takes anyone to learn a new program. So when Microsoft update Office, and we will get new icons and new things that Word is capable of doing, most of us just ignore those and carry on using the features that we have always used. Some of us look at the new features and think, oh, I wonder what they're thinking. I wonder how they can enhance my experience and perhaps save me some time working with this technology. So my strong advice is, depending where you are on the scale of, I love technology and I spend a lot of time looking at new tools and so on, to I've never even considered using technology, is just to get a trial, look at a whole range of technologies and just play. Push some buttons, try and break it, think about it, watch the videos online of the tutorial videos, and just really tune into what this technology is trying to deliver, and then begin to integrate it in. And I would always suggest strongly that you worked with one person as facilitator and one person driving the technology, and they are deeply connected, particularly in a face-to-face environment, but also online. You need that connection between the two of you so you can work together through this. And there's an incredible learning experience in that as well, when you extend that process out to a team of people, including the client, who are all actively learning how to do this better each time. And just do it is always the bottom line, really. You've just got to, you've got to create the experience, have your first experience, and then review it and think about it afterwards. I just want to share just 1 or 2 things to make things easier in terms of this technology landscape. I've tried to simplify it from a buyer's perspective or a customer perspective to say, what are you actually looking at when you look at these technologies? And there are hundreds of tools out there. So to make it simpler, I've just designed these 6 simple categories, and they are corporate social networks, the kind of the chat, the file share, the project team channels, and so on. Video and conference call tools. Zoom, of course, is the one that everybody's now talking about, but WebEx is there, GoToMeetings, and LogMeIn, and so on and so forth. There are event and conference tools. I'm sure you've used these where they're smartphone led. They allow people to add questions, they check in their work streams, and they look at profiles of speakers and other people, and they do the odd poll and so on. So those apps are great for the face-to-face environment in terms of encouraging people to be more active and more participatory. But I think there's more that we can do. Then there's team and project management tools specifically designed to run in agile environments or where project teams are working on and documentation is there and so on, replacing a lot of email, replacing a lot of shared drive or SharePoint or OneDrive and so on. Then there's visual collaboration tools where people have basically emulated what happens in the world with white walls or flip charts and allow people to share online so that they can add content, drawings, and whatever. And then at the bottom here is my decision support and meeting process support tools. So these are diligently built. They're built by facilitators. I've had a hand in designing quite a lot of these over the 25 years. And they're really focused on what the facilitator needs in order to enhance the group experience. So there are more complicated tools. There are many, many features that you can use in these that will align to your perfect design for an event. When we look at those, there are a range of tools. Of course, they don't all fit those categories quite neatly. There are lots of overlaps and different approaches. But if we look at the landscape, sorry for this slide, but it's meant to be chaotic because I really sense that from a customer buyer perspective, this market is chaotic. And what I've done is I've put the 6 groups there, which you can see in red: decision support meeting tools on the right-hand side, video and audio meeting tools on the left-hand side at the bottom. And that's the range really. So what I'm looking for is a more diligent conversation with customers about what's possible rather than basing it on, well, we use WebEx, therefore we're going to do this, or we use MS Teams, therefore we can do this, and try and extend their thinking. And I think this, finally, the conclusion here is that people are much more open to different ways of working in lockdown because it's a must-have rather than a nice-to-have, which it has been for a while. So there's my proposition. I'll be delighted if you want to ask any more questions. We're kind of out of time. If anybody's got anything to say now, please put it into the tool or send me some feedback afterwards. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. My email is there, stevebather@realizegroup.com, which I'll put in the chat as well. Any final comments from anybody? I'm quite amazed at how quickly that went. I hope it was valuable for you. I thank you for your participation. And again, just let me know if you've got any additional questions, and I'd be delighted to chat with you.
Thanks very much, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Great.
Yes,
All
thanks.
right.
Very helpful.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.